represented here, held a conference last year on the 15th of September 2016, which was called Your Right to Weigh. And on that conference, a lot of recommendations came up, and we're having this press conference to share some of the findings that came up on the 15th of September 2016. So on our panelists are, from my left is Agnes Chindima from Deaf Women Included, and followed by Gladys Changachire from Institute of Young Women's Development, and we have Sicha Sise Ngobu from Community Youth Development Trust in Rwanda. Gladys Changachire will speak to young women's participation. So I'm giving the floor to Gladys now.
Thank you. Morning all, and thank you for joining us in this conversation. Before I start my statement, I would like to acknowledge the presence of a number of organizations that I of course mentioned in my statement who have contributed towards the process that we are working around to promote the participation of young women in decision-making and political processes in Zimbabwe. And I want to say that these organizations are organizations that are coming from across the 10 provinces of Zimbabwe, and most of them do work with youth in general, but are also mainstreaming the issue of young women's participation in decision-making and political processes in their work across the different provinces. Our statement today has a deliberate title that young women participation is not a privilege, but a right, and state must honor. I hope this clearly articulates the message that we're trying to send across to the government of Zimbabwe, to civil society, to the media, and the generality of Zimbabweans. Young women's participation in decision-making and political processes in Zimbabwe remains notably very low. This phenomenon cuts across leadership positions in private and public sectors of the country. A research that we're concluding at the Institute for Young Women Development particularly notes that the representation of young women in elective politics in Zimbabwe at local government and parliamentary levels falls far below 5%. Owing to the efforts made by women who came before us, the country has signed up to a number and put in place laws and policies for equal opportunities to participation in decision-making and political processes, among other rights. The country has ratified the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW, and our own constitution, according to Section 17, 20, 56, Section 80 and Section 83 clearly provides for the rights of young women to participate in decision-making processes. As we held our conference last year, represented by young women who came from the 10 provinces of Zimbabwe, we articulated a number of challenges that young women are facing that are inhibiting their participation in decision-making and political processes. This conference was attended by commissions, the Gender Commission, Human Rights Commission, and also representatives from the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. We also had government ministries, particularly the Ministry of Youth and Ministry of Women's Affairs. And in that conference, we raised a number of issues that are inhibiting young women participation that were presented to these institutions. And here in our state, the challenges noted. The challenges are categorized as gaps in our policies and also as socio-cultural barriers that are affecting young women. In terms of policy gaps, we have noted that there is no data on elective representation of young women in political positions. And this data ideally should demonstrate benchmarks that civil society organizations and other actors that are working to promote young women's participation should be using as benchmarks to inform their advocacy and awareness raising work. And we have noted that this absence of data goes further to show that where data is captured, it's mostly disaggregated as number of women in elective positions and number of men in elective positions. And where at times they try to focus on youth, there is a component on youth, but it's silent on young women. And this is a key challenge for our organizations. Secondly, there are inadequate mechanisms to enforce gender equality provisions in political parties, particularly when it comes to ensuring representation of young women at local government levels. Noted that there are inadequate support mechanisms from both government and civil society organizations to support young women who make themselves vulnerable by participating in political processes in Zimbabwe. We also note that the agenda insensitive times, plans, and conduct of decision-making political processes, starting at the very minimal level of village, ward, and national processes in Zimbabwe. We realize that some meetings that target to discuss or formulate issues around political participation, they are carried out at very weird times when most of the young women are at home nursing their children. And at times, the meetings are also held in beer halls, and that comes with stigma around young women who participate in such kind of meetings. Also noted the inability by state institutions such as the police and our courts to deal with politically motivated violence, especially within and across political parties. Social barriers that we noted at the conference include gender violence such as sexual, physical, psychological, and emotional violence that is particularly targeted at young women who participate in political processes in Zimbabwe. There are also socially acceptable cultural practices of labeling young women who participate in decision-making processes, such as, they are regarded as prostitutes who are going into those spaces to seek the attention of men, or some of them are regarded as rebels or young women of loose morals and not marriage type of women. We also noted that there are religious norms that do not allow young women to participate in public and leadership processes. There is also discrimination of young women in participation based on their different abilities, financial position, marital status, educational qualifications, which grounds are not used against young men and elderly counterparts who participate in political processes. There is also a general disregard of young women's rights by some civil society and human rights organizations. As the Institute for Young Women Development, Deaf Women Included, Platform for Youth Development Trust, Mission to Live, Plumtree Development Trust, Community Tolerance, Reconciliation and Development, Community Youth Development Trust, Hands of Hope, Munanga, Wadzanai Community Development Trust, Youth Initiatives for Community Development, Zimbabwe Organization for the Youth in Politics, Zimbabwe Young Women's Network for Peace Building, organizations. We have been working on developing leadership and leadership skills of young women in facilitating dialogue spaces among the young women, local leaders, and leadership institutions. This has been an empowering process and transformative for young women between the ages of 15 and 35. As such, we have committed to strengthening our collective voice and encourage young women to participate in our country's decision-making and political processes. We share our publication, which documented these challenges and the experiences that I've noted earlier, in a publication called Young Women's Journeys on Political Participation in Zimbabwe. And we hope that this publication will inform the government of Zimbabwe and key stakeholders on the realities of young women in political participation. And we reiterate that young women's participation is not a privilege, but a right. We will continue with our Hair Right of Way, Give Way campaign, and in the same spirit, we make the following demands to the government of Zimbabwe. Number one, the government must accelerate the alignment of the Constitution with national laws to promote young women's participation. The government must uphold the Constitution to contribute towards an environment that is conducive for differently abled young women to participate in decision-making and political processes in Zimbabwe. The government must also promote the work of women, youth, and generality of organizations that are working to promote the rights of young women in Zimbabwe. The government must come up with an affirmative action framework for a young women's quota at local council and parliamentary levels. Lastly, the government of Zimbabwe and the Electoral Commission of Zimbabwe must ensure that party constitutions and internal democratic processes are in line with the national constitution in order to comply with constitutional equality and non-discrimination provisions that should allow the participation of young women in political processes. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Gladys. Now I'm going to ask Teacher Cecily Ndlovu from Community Youth Development Trust in Rwanda to share with us the road to 2018.
Okay. I'll focus on the road to 2018 and the demands by young women to civil society, political parties, and the government. As we all know that we have entered the election mode, and we also know that participation of young women has been recorded very low. We seek to engage these three stakeholders that play a significant role towards improving young women participation. Participation for young women in design, implementation, and evaluation of development policies and projects is fundamental for the development of prosperous societies. As such, their participation in all life processes is necessity towards achieving equity and responsive development. As we look ahead to electoral year, it is imperative that citizens from all walks of life be reminded and encouraged to contribute towards an environment that will allow for young women effective participation. To that end, we therefore make the following demands as young women. To civil society organizations, we say civil society organizations should maximize in their advocacy work to improve young women participation at all levels. This can be attainable through strategic targeting of young women as leaders at organizational level and civic processes. Civil society organization must ensure election-related information is accessible and available to young women, especially the marginalized young women in rural communities. Lobby and advocate for inclusive youth participation, which will then address gender parities, especially at community levels. Amplify the demands for a youth quota system that will ensure the inclusion of young women in the decision-making, economic, and political processes. Civil society organizations should also introduce nurturing programs in their programming for the upcoming young women leaders. To political parties, we demand that they should create a space for the effective young women participation at all levels, and also develop internal policies and democratic principles that promote young women participation and representation, promote young women voice and value their contributions, encourage them to rise up and defend their cause. To the government, we say the government of Zimbabwe should uphold to the constitution and enforce the provisions that promote young women participation. The government should also ensure that information related to elections is accessible and available to young women across the country. They should also develop a political will to ensure that spaces for young women commit to and effectively deal with challenges that inhibit young women participation, such as the intra-party violence. We know that young women, most of the time, if there is violence, they tend to chicken out. So the government has to ensure that the ground is level, and that the environment is conducive for them to actively participate. Government should also set aside policies strictly for young women, not to ban young women in the totality of women. For example, the quota system should set aside a certain percentage specifically for young women. At least 40% of the 66 seats in the parliament should go to young women. In conclusion, all Zimbabweans have an equal obligation and to respect the Constitution and promote young women participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Cecilia. We are now going to have Agnes Chindimba from Deaf Women Included, who's going to speak on a call for enforcement of provision that allow representation of women and girls living with disabilities.
First of all, I would like to, I will be signing. I didn't bring anything in written form so that you could concentrate on what I'm about to say. I'll use my phone for the time being.
Down to the problem being faced by women and girls with disabilities in Zimbabwe. It starts with our constitution. Basically, the constitution has no definition of disability. If you are not in the constitution, we can say we don't exist. Because the constitution is the supreme law of the country. If I am not there, it basically my needs being met. We are there supposed to be met by the government. Although the constitution has some sections that really except with disability, I will focus maybe on sign language. We have sign language in the constitution, but something that is simply there on paper, which is not being implemented by the Zimbabwe government, is basically useless to me. Are we having sign language government schools? The other is no. So basically, if I don't have a language, I am not a human being because language gives me an identity. Who am I? It links me with a code. If someone tells you you have no language, it is the same like you are not a being. Then our government send the UNCRPD practice. It is a lot of work this book, but then again, it was saying still it is not being implemented. What does that tell you? Our government like political will to make sure that our rights are being respected. Maybe I have a resume, but no one in government officials, they don't know anything about it. If you look at the constitution and the issue, there's a need to be argued with the constitution domesticated to suit our local needs. Because I can say America just did this, so it has to be done at home. So today I am going to focus on some of the articles from this book. Because to me, it is the legal policy that is going to ensure that my rights are respected and I am treated with dignity. You can now comment number 3 of 2016 on Article 3 of the CRPD points out that gradual changes in law and policy have occurred since the 1980s, and the recognition of more disabilities increases jurisprudence that developed under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. Highlighted concerns that they needed to be addressed regarding implementation and enforcement of laws, advancing the rights of men and girls with disabilities, and for the recommendation to be implemented. At a policy level, various United Nations bodies have started addressing issues facing women with disabilities, and a number of regional strategies addressing disability inclusive development include them. But much needs to be done at state level. Now, comment number 3 shows that there is strong evidence to show that women and those with disabilities face barriers to participation in most areas of life. These barriers create situations of multiple intersection forms of discrimination against women and those with disabilities, particularly with regard to equal access to education, access to economic opportunities, access to justice and equal recognition before the law, the ability to participate politically, and the ability to exercise control of their own lives across a range of contexts. For example, with regard to health care, including sexual and reproductive health, and where and with whom they wish to live. Article 6 of the CRPD provides the context for promotion of men and girls' rights. It is a cross-cutting article related to all articles of the Convention or remind the state the parties to include the rights of men and girls with disabilities in all action aimed at implementing the Convention. In particular, positive action measures need to be taken in order to ensure that women with disabilities are protected against multiple discrimination and can enjoy human rights and fundamental freedoms and representation on an equal basis with others. All measures must ensure the full development, advancement, and empowerment of more disabilities. Advancement and empowerment of more disabilities goes beyond the goal of development. Insofar as the measures must also target the improvement of the situation of human disabilities through their lifespan. It is not enough to recognize human disabilities in development measures. Rather, they must also be able to participate in and contribute to society. In line with the human-based approach, ensuring the empowerment of more disability means promoting their participation in public decision-making. Women those with disability have historically encountered many barriers to participation in public decision-making due to power imbalance and multiple forms of discrimination. They have yet few opportunities to establish or join organizations that can represent their needs as women and persons with disabilities. State parties should reach out directly to women and those with disabilities and create measures to guarantee that the perspective of women and those with disabilities are fully taken into account and that they will not be subject to any pressure for excessive violence and consent, especially in relation to sexual and reproductive health and violence, gender-based violence, including sexual violence. Finally, state parties must promote the participation of representative organizations of one with disability beyond disability-specific consultative bodies in mechanisms of legislation with the rest of many universities in Zimbabwe, e.g., minimum wage equity, equal pay equity, age of majority equity, etc. But this laws reflect a disability perspective. They are not taking into account the rights of men and young women with disabilities. State parties must adopt a two-step approach to implementing the rights of young women and girls with disabilities. So, though one assessment can mean stimulating interest in the rights of young women and girls with disabilities across all national action plans, strategic and policies concerning women and childhood and disability, as well as in sexual plans concerning, for example, gender equality, health, violence, education, political participation, employment, access to justice and social protection. Two, targeted and one-time action in specifically to women with disabilities. A two-step approach is essential to reducing inequality with regard to participation in the domain of rights. Then I will focus again on active citizenship. Active citizenship has been following the need to persons with disabilities, either through exceptional legal provision or using accessible procedures in facilities. Women and girls with disability are afraid to be known as a consequence. Women with disability have been absent from the political environment, and the issue of disability rights and duties has been relegated to the private sphere. In order to respond to such circumstances, Article 29 of the IYWD provides for important coverage to political rights of persons with disabilities. In fact, it goes beyond the basic right to vote and be elected to public office to address the right of persons with disabilities to take part in other aspects of public life and civil society. In doing so, Article 29 is declared a place in international human rights law of the right to participation decision making. When one's interests are affected in implementing legislation to power women with disabilities, we should look at Article 29. I will also allow the media. The media plays a very big role in advocacy and lobbying, but when the media look at media basically teaching the society that